I have stood in a dozen displacement observation rooms. I have never once seen a subject do what Tlacaelel did. He didn't look away. Not once. For 14 minutes, he looked directly at what had been done.
Welcome to Displaced. I'm your host, Mara Saleh, and that, of course, is Dr. Henrik Voss, the man leading these extraordinary and often deeply troubling temporal experiments. Henrik, today's file is number 7, The Names They Kept. Our subject is a keeper of records pulled from the height of the Aztec Empire and deposited, without warning, into the center of what used to be his world.
Tlacaelel, male, Mexica, 44 years old. His official role, the closest translation we have, is keeper of historical records and oral tradition. He was the man his civilization trusted to remember. In a culture that valued oral transmission as highly as written record, that was not an administrative position. It was a sacred one.
And where did he land?
The Zócalo, Mexico City, present day. He was there for 14 minutes.
The main plaza, the dead center of the city.
Which was also the dead center of Tenochtitlan, his city. The geometry of the land was identical, the same mountains at the same distances, the streets still roughly following the cardinal orientation he knew.
He knew the layout.
He understood where he was within the first 30 seconds, not what it was, where.
That's almost worse, isn't it? He didn't arrive somewhere alien, he arrived somewhere familiar that had been replaced.
Precisely. And that distinction matters enormously to what happened next. A subject who arrives in a completely foreign environment is overwhelmed. A subject who arrives somewhere they recognize but wrong has to actively process the wrongness. They can't look away from it. Every familiar element becomes a kind of accusation.
He recognized the skeleton of the place.
Yes, and everything built on that skeleton was not his.
So what did he actually do those first few minutes?
He began doing what he was trained to do. Inventory. Temple here, gone. The great market, gone. The causeways, gone. He was moving his gaze across the space the way a person checks a room after a break-in. Methodical, controlled. He was noting absences rather than presences. Everything he was looking at, he was also looking past, toward what should have been there.
He was doing his job, even in the middle of that.
It is a remarkable thing to observe. The professional reflex running under the shock. He had spent decades training himself to see and record.
Right.
That training didn't pause for the impossibility of his situation. If anything, it intensified. He was a man who understood that the act of witnessing was itself a form of preservation, even here, even this.
And then he saw the cathedral.
Yes.
Tell me about that moment.
The Metropolitan Cathedral stands on the northern edge of the Zócalo. It was built, deliberately, systematically, on top of and from the stones of the Templo Mayor, the great temple of Tenochtitlan. Tlacaelel would have known that temple the way you know the building you grew up in, not just architecturally, spiritually, the center of his world in every sense.
And it was gone.
Not entirely gone, that is the point. He could see it in the masonry, the carvings, half destroyed, repurposed, built into the walls of the cathedral. He was a man who had spent his life memorizing what things looked like. He recognized specific stones, not the building, the individual stones of a building that no longer existed, incorporated into the structure of its replacement.
What did he do when he understood that?
He became very still. That is what the anger looked like. Very still.
What was actually happening inside him in that moment? What were you reading?
He was not angry that it was destroyed. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. He had seen destruction before. Conquest was not a foreign concept to a man of his era and his position. He understood that civilizations absorbed and replaced each other. That was not the thing.
Then what was?
He was angry at what was kept. The city kept the shape. The streets kept the cardinal orientation. They built their churches on the sacred sites, every significant sacred site without exception, because they understood those sites carried meaning, which means they understood what they were destroying. The destruction wasn't ignorance. It was a decision made with full knowledge of exactly what was being erased.
They used his own geography against him, against his people.
They kept the bones and replaced the body, and then put their own names on the bones. He was a keeper of names, standing in the place where his names had been kept, and all of those names were gone, and someone else's names were carved above the doors, and the people walking through the square below him had no idea what the ground they were standing on used to be called.
How long did he stand there, once he understood?
The stillness came about 9 or 10 minutes in. He had approximately 4 minutes of his displacement remaining. He used them standing in the center of the Zócalo, facing the cathedral, not moving. The people walking past him moved around him. He was a fixed point. The equipment ran its duration. He returned mid-stand, still facing it.
What happened to him afterward, when he went back to his own time?
He lived another 22 years. His oral tradition work changed substantially. It became obsessive, more detailed, more urgent, more comprehensive than anything he had produced in the decades before. He trained 7 apprentices in those final years, where 2 had previously been the standard. 7 people to carry what he carried.
He knew something was coming.
He had seen the ending. He didn't know the specifics, the timeline, the mechanism, but he had stood in the Zocalo and looked at the cathedral and understood, in the most concrete terms possible, that what he was doing mattered more than he had previously understood it to matter. He told his apprentices, according to later accounts, that there was a reason to hurry. He didn't explain the reason. He didn't need to.
Did it work? Did what he preserved survive?
Some of it. Enough that we know his name. Enough that we know what he spent those final years doing. The oral traditions he trained 7 people to carry. Fragments of those survive in documents compiled after the conquest, in the work of later historians who gathered what remained. It is not what he preserved. It is a translation of a translation of a translation. But it exists. He would have a complicated relationship with what that means.
The names survived, just not in the form he intended.
No, they very rarely do.
Henrik, I have to ask, was this right? You took a man who spent his life preserving his civilization's memory, and you showed him 14 minutes of evidence that the effort ultimately failed, that everything he was working to protect was going to be replaced. Was that something you had the right to do?
He would have found out. The displacement moved the moment of discovery, not the discovery itself. What was coming for Tenochtitlan was coming regardless of anything I did. The collapse, the conquest, the systematic destruction of the record-keeping institutions he served. He was going to live through all of that. The displacement showed him the outcome 14 minutes before the process began.
You just described showing a man his own funeral and called it a scheduling decision.
That is an uncharitable reading.
Is it wrong?
No. It isn't wrong. What I would say, and this is not a justification, it is an observation, is that he did something with what he saw. He didn't collapse. He didn't stop. He came back from 14 minutes in the ruins of his world, and he trained 7 people, and he worked harder and faster than he had ever worked. What the displacement gave him, in addition to everything else it cost him, was a reason to hurry. He used that.
You're saying the grief made him more effective?
I'm saying the grief and the anger didn't stop him. And for a man in his position, in the years he had left, that matters. Whether I had the right to put him in that position, that is a different question. One I do not have a clean answer to.
Do you have an unclean one?
I have the kind that keeps me at my desk at 2 in the morning, reading accounts of what his apprentices preserved, looking for the things he specifically chose to pass on in those final years. Whether that constitutes conscience or just a different kind of obsession, I'm genuinely not sure.